the queen who faced execution with a smile, February 8, 1587. The great hall of Fotheringay Castle falls silent as a woman in black velvet walks toward the scaffold. Her head held high, her steps measured and graceful. This is Mary, Queen of Scots, and she is about to face her execution with a dignity that would echo through history. But how did a queen, once considered the most beautiful and accomplished woman in Europe, find herself walking toward the executioner's block? This is the extraordinary story of Mary Stuart, a tale of power, betrayal, love, and ultimately unshakable courage in the face of death. Born in 1542, Mary became Queen of Scotland when she was just 6 days old. Her father, James V, died shortly after her birth, leaving an infant to inherit a turbulent throne. Scotland was a dangerous place for a baby queen, caught between the ambitions of England and France, between Protestant reformers and Catholic traditionalists. When Mary was 5 years old, she was sent to the French court for her safety and education. There, she blossomed into a Renaissance princess fluent in 6 languages, skilled in music and poetry, trained in statecraft and diplomacy. She was tall, elegant, with auburn hair and amber eyes that captivated everyone who met her. At 15, Mary married Francis, the Dauphin of France, becoming Queen of France when he ascended the throne. She seemed destined for greatness, Queen of Scotland by birth, Queen of France by marriage. But fate had other plans. Francis died after just 2 years, leaving 18-year-old Mary a widow. In 1561, Mary returned to Scotland, a Catholic queen ruling a newly Protestant nation. She was intelligent and tried to rule fairly, but Scotland was a powder keg of religious tension and political intrigue. The Protestant lords who had seized power during her absence viewed her with suspicion, while Catholic nobles hoped she would restore their faith to prominence. Mary's personal life became her political downfall. Her marriage to her cousin Lord Darnley was a disaster. Darnley was handsome but weak, jealous, and violent. When Mary's secretary David Rizzio became too influential, Darnley had him brutally murdered in Mary's presence while she was 6 months pregnant. Then came the scandal that would define Mary's legacy. Darnley himself was found dead in 1567, apparently murdered. Many suspected Mary's involvement, especially when she married the Earl of Bothwell just 3 months later, the very man many believed had killed her husband. The Scottish nobles had seen enough. They rose in rebellion, defeated Mary's forces, and forced her to abdicate in favor of her infant son James. Mary, still only 24, was imprisoned in a castle on an island in the middle of Loch Leven. But Mary wasn't finished. In 1568, she made a daring escape from her island prison. Disguising herself as a servant, she fled across the loch and rallied her supporters. However, her army was defeated at the Battle of Langside, and Mary faced a choice that would seal her fate. She could flee to France or seek refuge with her cousin Elizabeth I of England. She chose England, believing family blood would protect her. It was the greatest mistake of her life. Elizabeth I faced an impossible dilemma. Mary was her cousin and a fellow queen, but she was also a Catholic with a legitimate claim to the English throne. Many English Catholics considered Mary the rightful Queen of England, since they viewed Elizabeth as illegitimate. To release Mary would be dangerous. To execute her would set a terrible precedent. So Elizabeth chose a third option: indefinite imprisonment. For 19 long years, Mary lived as Elizabeth's prisoner, moved from castle to castle, always under guard. She spent her days embroidering, writing letters, and plotting her return to power. Her rooms were comfortable, but her freedom was gone. The vibrant young queen, who had danced at the French court, was now a middle-aged woman whose world had shrunk to the walls of her prison. During these years, Mary became the focus of Catholic conspiracies against Elizabeth. Plot after plot swirled around her name. Some she knew about, others she didn't. Each failed conspiracy tightened the net around her. Elizabeth's spymaster, Francis Walsingham, was determined to gather enough evidence to convince Elizabeth that Mary must die. The final trap came in 1586. Walsingham orchestrated the Babington Plot, a scheme to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne. This time, he made sure Mary's correspondence with the conspirators was intercepted and decoded. When the plot was uncovered, Mary's coded letters provided the evidence Elizabeth needed. Mary was put on trial for treason, an unprecedented event. Never before had an anointed queen been tried by her subjects. Mary defended herself brilliantly, arguing that as a sovereign queen, she could not commit treason against another monarch. But the verdict was predetermined. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. Elizabeth agonized over signing the death warrant. For months, she hesitated, knowing that executing Mary would shock Europe and set a dangerous precedent. But pressure from Parliament and her advisers eventually forced her hand. On February 1, 1587, Elizabeth signed Mary's death warrant. When Mary learned of her fate, she didn't break down or plead for mercy. Instead, she spent her final week writing letters, distributing her belongings among her servants, and preparing her soul for death. She wrote to the Pope, to the King of Spain, and to her son James, now King of Scotland, forgiving all who had wronged her. On the morning of February 8th, Mary dressed carefully in black velvet, with a white veil, the colors of mourning, but also of martyrdom. She pinned a crucifix to her dress and placed a rosary around her neck. When they came to escort her to the Great Hall, she walked with dignity, supported by two of her faithful servants. The hall was packed with witnesses and nobles, officials, and townspeople who had come to see the end of the Queen of Scots. A low scaffold had been erected, covered in black cloth with the executioner's block waiting in the center. Mary listened calmly as her death warrant was read aloud. When asked if she had any final words, she forgave her enemies and prayed for Elizabeth's soul. She declared that she died for her Catholic faith and hoped her blood would help restore England to the true religion. The moment that stunned everyone came when Mary began to undress for her execution. Underneath her black gown, she wore a crimson petticoat, the color of martyrdom in the Catholic Church. Even in death, she was making a statement about her faith and her sacrifice. Mary knelt at the block and placed her head upon it, stretching out her arms and crying, "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." The executioner raised his axe. It took 3 blows to complete the execution. The first missed, the second failed to sever her neck completely, and only the third finished the task. But even in death, Mary had one final surprise. When the executioner lifted her severed head to show the crowd, her auburn hair, which had turned gray during her long imprisonment, came away in his hands. The head that fell to the scaffold floor was that of an old woman with sparse gray stubble, revealing that the beauty of her youth had long since faded. Mary, Queen of Scots, died as she had lived, dramatically, controversially, but with unshakable dignity. Her execution shocked Europe and would ultimately contribute to the Spanish Armada's attack on England the following year. She had faced her death with courage, transforming her final moments from a scene of royal humiliation into a display of royal grace that would be remembered for centuries. Today, Mary Stuart is remembered not just as the Queen of Scots, but as a woman who refused to let imprisonment, betrayal, and even death strip away her dignity. She smiled in the face of the executioner because she knew that while they could take her life, they could never take her crown or her courage.